Hello everyone, and welcome to our edited recording of the first ever Fulbright Michigan Chapter webinar. I'm Jeffrey Nutt, President of the Michigan Fulbright Chapter. This webinar is centered around Resurgent Detroit. Our discussion will help you understand Resurgent Detroit's national and global influence as an automotive, sport, music, technology, and art hub. Ultimately, it will help you find out what drives the Motor City. The webinar was moderated by the Honorable Regent Katherine E. White. Regent White received her Bachelor's of Science in Engineering degree in Electrical Engineering and Computer Science from Princeton University, a Juris Doctor degree from the University of Washington, an LLM degree from the George Washington University Law School, and a Master's degree in Strategic Studies from the U.S. Army War College. She is currently a professor of law at Wayne State University in Detroit. She's also a lieutenant colonel in the U.S. Army, currently serving in the Michigan Army National Guard as the command judge advocate. In addition, she was a U.S. Germany Fulbright Senior Scholar, was a White House Fellow, and is a registered patent attorney. She was elected to the University of Michigan Board of Regents in 1998, re-elected in 2006, and in 2014. Let's jump right into the webinar.
Well, it's my great honor to be here to be part of this webinar. And we have several panelists with us here today. And what I'd like to do is just kind of introduce who's on our panel and then give them an opportunity to do some introductory remarks. And then after we do that, we'll open it up for questions and answers from the audience. So first, we're going to have Jennifer Oxley, who is the Executive Director of the Fulbright Association. We're also going to have Bryan Barnhill, who's the Chief Talent Officer for the City of Detroit. And we will have Brent, who is a graduate assistant and an instructor here at Wayne State University. And of course, we have Jeffrey Nutt, who's an Oxford University Fulbright alum. Okay, we'll start with Bryan Barnhill. That's okay.
We'll come back to Jennifer.
We'll come back to Jennifer. You're a Detroit native and Harvard graduate who started working out in New York City in a prestigious real estate firm, but decided to come back home to Detroit. And so please tell us your Detroit story, how you came to work for Mayor Mike Duggan, and how you envision your role as the Chief Talent Officer in helping Detroit's transformation.
Well, thank you very much, and it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you to Jeffrey, whose enthusiasm and optimism for Detroit is unparalleled. Thank you for the invitation. Thank you for the student in-house guests and for our online audience. I am from the city of Detroit, and I grew up in a neighborhood outside of the city airport. Years later, I learned that it was the most dangerous zip code in the city of Detroit, which I think is very interesting because I had a wonderful upbringing, and it was largely because I had a great support system, my parents and community. Growing up in that environment, the whole idea of supporting your community was instilled in me. So when I had the opportunity to go to school outside of the city and work outside the city, I couldn't help but dream about my return. And I thought that I would come back to Detroit and help my community as this very successful individual who would have a lot to teach and a lot to give. But something interesting happened in 2009 when I was in the office and I was reading the newspaper. The mayor at the time was going to jail. The automotive industry was on the brink of collapse. The city was on the brink of financial ruin. And the city of Detroit is arguably hardest hit by the worst recession the country's ever seen. And I thought to myself, you know what? This would be the great time to come back home to Detroit because where there's crisis, there's opportunity. And I thought that I'd have an amazing learning experience, an amazing developmental experience coming back to Detroit at that time when a lot of the leaders would be obsessed with creating solutions to the challenges of the day. So came back home, much to my parents' chagrin, and spent a couple of months trying to find a job. And I'm the type of person I lived my entire life doing the right thing so that I would avoid being an adult living at home. But it just happened otherwise. So I ended up getting a job working at a nonprofit and ended up volunteering on a campaign for a gentleman who was running for city council. Started off as a paper passer-outer, and then I had some ideas about how I thought we could strengthen the campaign, so we reorganized the campaign. And the gentleman, whose name is Charles Pugh, ended up getting elected city council president. I created a role for myself within that organization where I was the director of policy and legislative affairs. And it was an exciting opportunity because I was the guy who would advise someone how to vote on a lot of the important issues. So the important issue of the day was the pre-bankruptcy matters, a consent agreement, and leading up into bankruptcy. So that gave me a lot of exposure. I got a chance to roll up my sleeves and help address one of the greatest challenges the city's faced. And I was maybe 23 at the time. Into that role, I ended up getting an opportunity to run Mayor Duggan's campaign, which again was amazing. I think I was 25 or 26 at the time, and that was really one of the most important things I'd ever done. So just a few years into making the decision to come back to Detroit to be part of the resurgence, if you will, I was doing exactly what I set out to do. And I'm so excited to see other people like me who want to make their dreams come true in the city of Detroit.
That's a wonderful story. Can you tell us a little bit about what you do as a Chief Talent Officer for Detroit?
Oh yeah, absolutely. So after the campaign, I found myself in a similar position where I created this role, which is unlike many roles in city governments around the country. We found that we would need to build a lot of capacity in order to execute the plan of adjustment, which is essentially a roadmap that you have to put together coming out of bankruptcy so that you won't go back into bankruptcy. But at the same time, we wanted to reinvigorate city government with a lot of new voices, a lot of new opinions, and some young folks. So what I do as Chief Talent Officer is primarily twofold. I spend a lot of time trying to find people to work for us. So cabinet level officials, department directors, senior management level individuals, and we've been able to have a considerable level of success in attracting high quality young talent to come work for us in the city of Detroit. Secondly, I oversee the appointments to all of the boards, commissions, and authorities that the mayor has appointing power to. And I'd say, thirdly, I'm a political advisor to the mayor. So it's, when you think about all those things, it's really about architecting a people organization that is needed to help you drive a variety of initiatives that are key to making the city a better place.
That's terrific. Thank you so much. Next, let's go to Brent Glass for you to talk a little bit about your experience and your background and your expertise in urban politics and planning.
Sure. I will say I think I should have went first. Going after Regent White and Bryan Barnhill is no easy task. But I did my undergrad at a little-known college called Eureka College. It's a college of about 750 students in central Illinois, amongst the cornfields. And ironically, it was there, amidst the cornfields, that I decided to study urban politics and urban policy. It took me to go to a town of 5,000 to realize I really hated that, and I liked being around people. So I did some just work and try to figure out what I wanted to do. Decided I wanted to come back to Detroit.
That's really great. I think next, Jennifer, are you able to be on the line with us now?
Yeah.
Great. So as the executive director of the Fulbright Association, can you give us an idea of how international exchange is impacting the economic situation here in Detroit?
No, I sure can. And sorry for the technology differences. I actually am on my speakerphone at work and my cell phone to make this work, but we're in. We are represent the alumni for the Fulbright Association. And the international exchange, it's a very exciting story for Michigan, actually, specifically Michigan State or Wayne State. So overall, international students provide $1 billion in financial contribution to the state of Michigan and support about 14,000 jobs. Michigan State alone, 4,707 employees support international exchange programs, and 13% of the campus is from international students. Wayne State is a close second with over 1,000 jobs, and $73 million of the budget for Wayne State comes from international students that come to Michigan and to Wayne State. So this is the same type of thing you see all around the country, and the Alumni Association for Fulbright has 60 chapters, Jeffrey leading one of them around the country, and our goal is to then provide talent to the local markets, including Michigan. So Bryan, for you, Fulbrighters are great, but it is a wonderful opportunity for international exchange to bring economic value and cultural value to Detroit and the state of Michigan.
My experience with the Fulbright program is this opportunity for when students go abroad to have this international understanding where you really immerse yourself in a culture and then you come back. How does the Alumni Association work with its chapters, not only in Detroit but around the country, to keep fostering those experiences of international understanding and then, of course, throughout the lifelong learning process?
The chapters are the lifeline for the alumni program. They are, as a whole, all volunteers like Jeffrey. And at the beginning of the call, it was said that Jeffrey was a force of nature, and he is. The chapters put on around the country about 230 to 250 events a year. And they do that all from a pro bono standpoint. I think Jeffrey's chapter does anywhere between 6 and 10 events a year. The idea is threefold. One is to bring together visiting Fulbrighters and teach them about American culture. So they do enrichment activities for visiting Fulbrighters, and then we obviously learn from them. So it's a person-to-person cultural exchange, some of the events. The other thing that the alumni do is they come together and try to actually advocate for the program's future, because the alumni voice and the effect of Fulbrighters around this country is really strong. And the third thing is we try to actually support each other. So whether it's capacity, volunteerism, mentoring, the Fulbright community is incredibly strong, and they really stick together, but not in a group that just sticks only to themselves. They really are interested in serving their communities and helping to build tolerance between cultures.
Great, thank you. Please stay on the line so when there are questions you can participate.
You got it.
Great. And so Jeffrey, you would be next. You're born and raised here in Detroit and a graduate of the American University Law School, and you've served in all branches of the U.S. government, including a very interesting position as a judicial intern at the Office of Counselor to the Chief Justice of the United States. And of course, you've launched your own law firm that works on legal education and public interest practice. You're a Fulbright alum at Oxford University, and you're also, importantly, the current president of the Fulbright Association Michigan chapter. So tell us, please, share your thoughts regarding Detroit and its resurgence and your role in all of that.
Yes, well, thank you, Kathy. I am just very enthusiastic about the future for Detroit because of the experiences I've had on and off throughout my whole life, having been born and raised in the city and been fortunate enough to be able to, just at the drop of a hat, do something so exciting such as to even go to Canada for lunch, for example, or go to a Red Wings game or a Tigers game or a Lions game, especially if they're winning, shall we say, as well as, of course, the Pistons games and all of the fabulous, sports and recreation are really off the charts. In fact, it was no surprise to me last year. Actually, no, it was earlier, very early this year, that Detroit was selected as the second best travel destination for sports travelers in all of the United States, only being surpassed by Washington, D.C. So that, to me, was no surprise, and I've been so enthusiastic about the future for the city with new leaders like Bryan, like Mayor Duggan, as well as the many Fulbrights that we have seen have such great experiences visiting Detroit and studying in Detroit that in the recent past we've even reached out to some of our friends who have been involved with some of the activities in the amateur sports world of the Olympics as well as the Pan Am Games. So we would not be surprised if one day, even as early as 2023, that the Pan Am Games could be held in a city like Detroit. It's a boundless city with unlimited potential, and we have great fun sharing this with those that come to Detroit and experience what it's really like.
That's great. So with that, let's open it up a bit to the students here for questions that they may have for any of the panelists.
Yes, and Instructor Glass will help us if we need to with the cordless mic if we need to.
There's a cord, but
There is a cord, okay. Just chime in. When I was growing up in the city was built to have the capacity for about 1 million more people than it presently has, and there are plans in collaboration with the state of Michigan, I believe, to strengthen some of the funding mechanisms to be able to enhance and maintain the transit. Also, maybe Bryan, you could comment on what might have been happening in the recent past, or Brent, regarding the light rail situation in Detroit, and if there's anything new on the horizon in that respect.
Oh, yeah, sure. I mean, we had positive impacts other than spending less time in a car. When you talk about environmental quality, but also getting us outside of very confined spaces that keep us apart from each other and get us to interact more with each other. But I mean, to your point, I welcome the traffic. I welcome the crowds. Other cities that we try to model ourselves after, or at least look to as some forms of inspiration, are horrible when it comes to traffic. I mean, you go to New York or L.A. or Atlanta or Chicago during rush hour, we have it easy in comparison. But once we get to a point where we make the city a more desirable place to live, when we have more transportation options for residents and visitors, I think you'll start to see some pressure ease on traffic. But I mean, I think it's just a good sign in terms of people, for once, wanting to be here and enjoy the city.
Brent, do you have anything to add to that?
nothing to add to that.
The one thing I think sometimes we forget, which adds to your point, Tim, is the fact that Detroit is it's a large geographic area. And I think that adds to a lot of our problems because we're not as dense as we could be. And so the investment is often directly proportional to how many people you have living in your city. And so the more people that move back, the better to be able to have resources to build up that infrastructure.
And just on another note, I mean, your concern is also a valid one. And one thing that we've got to get used to as a city is the fact that people want to be here, which has not always been the case. So the mayor is spending a lot of time with the police department, with our traffic engineering department, on learning how to manage traffic better and to manage crowds better. It helps people's experience when they're visiting the city, when they're working in the city, but also just from a public safety standpoint, it helps to be good at managing how people enter and exit places. So that, I mean, that is a concern that we're working on.
Are there any other questions? Great. Can you come to get the mic, please? What's your name, sir? Great. Mayor Duggan has a whole plan for that, but I'm not as familiar with the exact. Are you familiar with some of that?
Oh yeah, sure. I mean, it was a plan that we established during the campaign, and one thing that, I mean, there are many good things I could say about the mayor, but probably chief among them is the fact that we're actually executing on the things that we said we would do during the campaign. So the whole issue of blight and abandonment is a personal one to me. I grew up next door to an abandoned house that caught on fire, and I used to play in the rubble next door. My little brother had to get stitches because he busted his knee on some broken glass. There was a drug house down the street. All the kids in the neighborhood knew where it was, and in hindsight, I mean, what a tragic way to live. And when you think about it, there are many people, far too many people in our city whose perspective of life is shaped by neglect. Just imagine how the environment must inform a person's overall views of themselves and the world around them. So improving our neighborhoods has always been priority number one. So how do we get here, right? Briefly, we just talked about the fact that the city is so big and the population has declined considerably. A key tool that a city uses to make sure that you can deliver city services and make sure a place looks good is revenue. Revenue comes in the form of taxes that you get from people who work in the city and people who live in the city. So as your population declines, the financial resources that you have to be able to make sure a city is of quality, it declines considerably. So that has pretty much been one of the major reasons why the city has decayed so. So that said, what the mayor decided to do was to create a zero tolerance policy for absentee property owners who are not taking care of their property. So basically, we're operating on a nuisance theory of the law that pretty much says you don't have a right to own a property that's a nuisance to the community around you. So the person who owned the burnt out house next door to me would have gotten sued, and this is actually going on right now through the land bank. We have a team of attorneys that are going block by block throughout the city of Detroit, and they're looking at the quality of properties. If a property is deemed a nuisance, then we are filing a lawsuit against the owners of that property. We are encouraging the owners of those properties to sign a consent agreement. That consent agreement pretty much says you have a period of time to fix the property. If you don't, then we're going to take it. So when we take the property, that goes into land bank, where we clear title and make sure that we can sell the property to someone who's going to take care of it. So we're taking the properties that can be salvaged, and for those that can't, we're using federal dollars and fire insurance escrow dollars to demolish them. And for the homes that can be salvaged, we're selling them online. So if you're interested in being a property owner, if you're going to be a responsible property owner in the city of Detroit, you can actually get homes on the cheap by going to buildingdetroit.org and bidding on a house. It's a very simple solution to that problem, but what happens when you take a house that's been a nuisance in a neighborhood and you bring in someone who fixes it up, is that you spread a message of hope in a neighborhood. So the mayor, he does this presentation where he goes and shows picture by picture of the houses that we've seized and the neighborhoods that we've made changes in. And the first picture, you'll see a bunch of abandoned homes. But once we go through and demolish the properties, put the properties in the hands of people who actually want to live there, then the people who live around the problem houses, they start taking more care of their property. So you have a very organic approach to neighborhood development. Now it's going to take some time, but we're actually seeing more progress in that front than we've seen in a long time. This past Angels Night, for instance, we've had the lowest number of fires in a long time, and that's largely because we're taking care of a lot of the abandoned homes. Now there's still a lot more to go, but we have a mechanism in place where we are targeting areas to demolish homes and get homes in the hands of people who want to take care of them. The next effort after that is going to be taking care of the commercial structures as well.
What's so unique about this approach is cities often in the past would just condemn properties, and then they'd have condemned properties on their books, and we're not focused on making sure they could go after the owners to see if they can start first with getting them to pay to fix the properties, and if not, then getting the hands into someone who will fix it up. And that's what the biggest shift is for what the Mayor Duggan plan has accomplished. Any other? Go ahead.
Yeah, I'd like to just one other option that's been discussed, and that is if there are suitable areas that are sparsely populated, Detroit might want to consider taking a look at what was done in some of the places like the city of Troy, Michigan, as well as literally Berlin and Tokyo, and what they did after the upheaval of World War II. And Kathy, you can probably comment more on Berlin, but I was over there on my Fulbright and noticed how amazingly beautiful their city was and how creatively they used their water and the water table as a way to beautify the community. And one of the things that a lot of people may not realize is just north of the city of Detroit in the suburbs is another place called Troy, where there was a whole vast, about a square mile of abandoned gravel and sand pits, sand mined and gravel pits around the 1950s. They were no longer in use, and it looked almost like the surface of the moon, and the developer decided, well, why not just dig a little bit lower and allow and put some topsoil over the land, and lo and behold, within a few years, there were about 10 lakes surrounded by nice homes, and people don't realize in Metro Detroit sometimes even that the water table in the city of Detroit is closer to the surface of the ground, and according to the former Troy city manager, they think there that it would probably be even less costly to put in lakes that could beautify some of the vast open areas that do presently exist in the city, with some beautiful waterfront vistas and some very nice homes.
Thank you. Any other questions?
Hey, Jeffrey.
Yes.
This is Jennifer.
Yes, Jennifer.
I am the only one, obviously, on the panel that does not live in Michigan or have a personal history there, though I am licking my wounds from being a married Ohio State family fan and having a tough run of it on Sunday. But I will tell you that there are some real parallels between what everyone is saying and Washington, D.C. In a sort of multi-pronged community empowerment approach and some creative solutions. I've lived here now for 20 years, and when I moved to D.C., it was a war zone, to be honest. A very, very tough city to live in. But what they did was very creative from a tax perspective, between the tax discounts offered to businesses and to residents who move there. They also changed the entire police system here. And actually recruited community people, trained them as police officers, so it felt like it was your neighbor that you grew up with that became your police officer. There's been a number of things that have been very similar. They completely refurbished we have the largest city park in the country for a very small space, because we are about a little tiny bit compared to Detroit. But it has been, when you add all of that together, which is what I'm hearing on this panel, it's a similar thing when you see the resurgence. DC is now, it's an unbelievable place to live. And Detroit, I've been there many times, is a wonderful place to be. And it just, these little things just start to build upon each other. But I just wanted to reference DC in the sense that it has also had a very serious, though not the same economic platform, but a really serious turnaround in the last 20 years, and they used very creative solutions to get there as well.
Hi again. I hope you enjoyed the webinar. The panel was kind to field many additional student questions at Wayne State University's American Government class on behalf of the Fulbright Association Michigan chapter and our presenters. Thank you for joining, and we look forward to bringing you another insightful webinar.